The moon hung high, swollen and blood-red, casting a grim pall over the wilderness below. Each tree stood like a sentinel in the cold night, their shadowy limbs twisting and reaching as though possessed. A cry, guttural and raw, broke the silence, and from within the shadows, Jar Jar felt his body betray him. Pain surged through his bones, wrenching them into new, unnatural shapes. His skin stretched, tearing through his tattered clothing as thick fur erupted along his limbs. His back arched, vertebrae cracking, pulling him down onto all fours. Each breath came ragged and feverish as his hands, now paw-like, scaly, and tipped with jagged claws, dug into the earth. His eyes burned and blazed a fierce crystalline blue as he caught sight of others around him, locked in the same horrifying metamorphosis. With a final, echoing snap, the change was complete. Where once had stood, men now prowled a horde of monstrous, beautiful creatures. Wolves with fur ranging from pitch black to ghostly white, each bristling with a barely contained rage. Their eyes flickered like flames, wild and feral. Out of the pack emerged a towering figure, a wolf with a menacing presence that stilled even the fiercest among them. He lifted his muzzle to the heavens and released a howl that pierced the night, a dark symphony of power and command. In unison, the wolves howled, their voices rising and merging with the cry of the leader, creating a sound both terrifying and enthralling. Then, as if driven by some unspoken signal, they sprang into motion, bodies gliding like shadows toward the distant drumbeat of an advancing army. One day prior, within the same forest, Jar Jar had been tracking an animal, his hunt marked by the fresh scar slashing across his shoulder, a wound inflicted by a creature not of this world. His every step was calculated, his spear held in readiness as he scanned the thicket ahead. A rustle of grass broke his focus. Heart pounding, he turned and met the piercing gaze of a massive bison, a creature of unnatural size, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with horns sharp as knives and hooves heavy as stone. Its eyes held him in a frigid stare, seeming to assess him just as intently. Jar Jar tightened his grip.
"Today, I take your head,"
he murmured, his voice barely a whisper against the tension in the air. With a fierce battle cry, he charged forward, spear raised, and the beast mirrored his advance. But as the distance between them vanished, the bison halted with a shuddering groan, collapsing at his feet. Confused, Jar Jar peered down to find a large spear jutting from the beast's skull, a wound not of his making. He glanced up to see Obena atop his horse, an arrogant smirk plastered on his face.
"Too slow,"
Obena called, dismounting with a theatrical swagger. In one swift motion, he pulled a broad sword from his belt, swung it over his head, and struck, severing the beast's head. Without a second glance at Jar Jar, Obena drew an arrow from his quiver, setting it ablaze before releasing it into the sky, where it trailed a streak of yellow smoke. Across the forest, other flaming arrows rose into the night, each casting trails of red smoke against the stars, a sign of hunters closing in, their signals merging in the night as a warning, or perhaps a challenge. That night, the kingdom was alive with celebration. Men raised their voices in song, and the women danced gracefully around a vast bonfire, its light flickering across the clearing and casting a warm, almost hypnotic glow over the crowd. At the center of this spectacle stood the bison's severed head, mounted upon a ceremonial pike beside the flames, a sacred centerpiece for this ancient festival, an offering to unseen forces that demanded tribute. Obena moved through the throng, his cloak fashioned from the beast's fur, his head held high as if he alone had conquered nature itself. Jar Jar watched from the edge, biting back his frustration as Hanu tended to the fresh wound on his shoulder. She worked with swift, practiced hands, though her gaze lingered on Jar Jar's face, catching the shadow of something unreadable in his eyes. He was not looking at her. Instead, his gaze settled on Mira, who danced with an effortless grace, her laughter blending with the night's melody.
I could kill him, you know.
He muttered, his tone laced with bitterness as he watched Obena parade about. Hanu's brows lifted in mild surprise.
And what exactly do you see in her?
Her tone was a shade too casual, but she followed his gaze to Mira, who, oblivious to their scrutiny, moved with an elegance